Good afternoon to all of our viewers in our Facebook group and to anyone who might be listening via our YouTube channel. I'm Karen Seitz with A New Life Center, and I am a mentor for married women, and I teach them how to be responsible for their own happiness as a way to have the marriage that they always dreamed of. And today I'm here with David Cope, founder of A New Life Center. Hi, David. How are you today?
That's great, Karen. Thank you.
Of course. Do you
I'm
want to
looking,
take a moment and introduce yourself?
sure. Thank you.
Okay.
So my name is David Cope, and I'm a founder of A New Life Center with my partner Peggy. I got involved in building healthy relationships after I got divorced in the year 2000. I realized I didn't want to be on my deathbed, wishing that I had a loving, intimate relationship with another with a woman. And so I did a lot of research after my divorce to find out what makes a happy and fulfilling marriage. And everything I read was the things I was trying to do in my marriage that ended up my marriage being failed. And so I realized that to have a happy and loving and intimate relationship, it had to start with me. That in order for me to bring that into a relationship, I had to build a relationship with myself. So the key that I've learned to a healthy relationship and loving and intimate relationship with another person is to have that relationship with yourself first. So my partner Peggy and I have been teaching individuals and couples how to find happiness within themselves, to create a relationship with themselves, having intimacy with themselves, and bring that into the relationship as a foundation of their marriage rather than looking to their partner to provide something that they don't have within themselves. So t- today we're going to be talking about something that's part of the exploration that we've done at a New Life Center. We do a lot of research and study with, in this case, with women because it's a topic involving women in marriages for over 10 years, and found some very commonality amongst women in marriages, and that those are the things we try to talk about in these videos. So, Karen, can you talk? What are we going to be talking about today?
We're going to be talking about a really important issue that gets in the way of having a happy marriage. In fact, the title of our video today is The One Shift You Need to Make in Your Marriage to Live Happily Ever After. So today we're going to be talking about codependency and what that actually is and and how to see that in yourself and your marriage and what you can do about it.
So it's we're talking about codependency,
We are. It's a big topic.
and Karen, what was it like when you first learned about codependency and how pervasive it was in your marriage? Can you share a little before we jump into that topic so
Of course.
our listeners can be prepared?
Yeah, learning about this topic in my marriage was completely overwhelming in that what we're talking about in codependency is allowing another person to be responsible for how you experience yourself. And in looking at myself in my own marriage, I realized how I had made everything about how I experienced myself, what I liked, what I didn't like, what I would do from day to day, all about my husband and being dependent on him to give me the experience I wanted of myself, or when I wasn't having the experience of myself that I wanted, blaming him for it. And it shows up in every nook and cranny of a relationship and of a marriage. And so when I first started working with this and looking at myself in this and my own marriage, it was like everywhere I turned, there it was right in my face of how entangled and how enmeshed I was with my husband.
Yeah, thank you,
Yeah.
Karen. So, as part of our relationship strategy that we teach, and the Facebook Foundation, we have some principles that we consistently reinforce because it's part of untangling ourselves from women's perspective with our husband and no longer being codependent, meaning how I'm experiencing myself is dependent upon how my husband treats me and what he does and doesn't do. Part of that entanglement, we have three concepts that we keep uh, as a foundation that can help women understand how can they get untangled and what are those three principles that we teach.
Yeah, so the first principle, and I love what you just said, David, before I get into them, that these three principles really do teach us how to untangle ourselves and finally feel strong and solid in who we are. And so that first principle is that you are responsible for your happiness, that there's nothing and no one that can ever make you happy, that happiness is something that we have to find within ourselves and we have to do the work to cultivate that and find it within ourselves. And the second principle is that you are the only person that you can change, that you can't change your husband. Your husband cannot change you. That if you want to experience a different type of marriage and be happy, then you have to be the one to change. When we wait for someone else to change or think if they only did this or if they stopped doing this, and what we're talking about today, that is the ultimate definition of codependent and waiting for them to change or do something different. And when we do that, we make ourselves victims.
Mm.
So if you really want to be empowered and you want to see long lasting, real change in your marriage, you have to be the one to change. And then the third guiding principle is that authentic intimacy begins with having a relationship with yourself
Mhm.
and feeling good about who you are. And when I have a relationship with myself, that's kind of the cure for codependence. I know
Yeah.
who I am. I know what I like and don't like. I know how to make choices and decisions for me independent of anybody else.
Mhm.
And that's really where intimacy begins because then we can show up as ourselves and show up with our walls down and not be codependent on someone else for how we feel or how we experience life or any relationship.
Thank you, Karen. That
Cool.
was very clear. So, for our listeners, we're trying to differentiate between codependency in the traditional psychological model of like there's something wrong, a mental illness. So, I wanted to read what I found on the internet for the definition of codependency. It is an emotional and behavioral condition that affects an individual's ability to have a healthy, mutually satisfying relationship. It is also known as relationship addiction, and it often belongs to a dysfunctional, one-sided relationship when a person relies on the other for nearly all of their emotional needs and self-esteem needs. And what we're trying to do today is normalize codependency and to see it as a pervasive experience that we experience in our marriages and in relationships with other people. And as Karen said earlier, when we look at codependency as a pervasive experience, much like being a victim and blaming somebody else for the experience of ourselves, we can look at it and understand it as why we're unhappy in our marriage and why we feel stuck and feel like we're trapped in a marriage and have no way out is because in codependency, it is in this case with women, it's our husband that is making us feel this way. It's our marriage that's making us feel this way. That how I am experiencing myself is dependent upon my husband and what he does and doesn't do. So we're trying to use codependency as a way to better understand the challenges that we have in our marriages and a way out. Because as long as we are codependent, meaning how I experience myself is dependent upon how somebody acts and behaves, that I do not have an independent experience of myself that is separate from my husband. And codependency is what causes us to be intertwined with our partner, where we have Often women complain in their marriages, I don't know who I am anymore. I feel lost and I no longer have a sense of self. That's codependency creates that feeling. And what we're trying to do is expose codependency as a normal relationship issue because traditional marriage counseling and therapy, if you go to traditional therapy, they base traditional therapy's foundation is based upon trying to satisfy our codependent needs in a relationship. So, for example, if you go to marriage counseling, they'll say, you have a communication problem. The wife might complain, my husband never listens to me, and we can't have a constructive conversation that has any resolution. So in traditional marriage therapy, what they say is to the husband, what can you do differently so your wife can be heard and make sure you're communicating? And what can the wife do better? What we're trying to explain in that situation, that is codependent behavior, that my ability to be heard and seen and understood is dependent on how my husband is responding to my communication rather than being responsible for how I communicate and hearing and understanding myself. So I no longer need my husband to hear and understand me. I'm providing that within myself. So, Karen, can you talk a little bit about some of the things that our listeners can help understand some of the things that they might be doing that is codependent so they
Yeah.
can understand how they might be experiencing themselves as codependent in their marriage?
Of course, I have a great list here that I can relate to all of these in my own marriage and having to catch myself in these things. And these are the things that I work with my clients on, that this is really normal. I want to emphasize what David was saying. The whole point of looking at this and normalizing codependency and giving it that broader definition is so you can work on these things and
Mhm.
get to know who you are again and empower yourself to turn your marriage around and turn your life around and turn your relationship with yourself around. So these aren't bad or wrong. This is just normal behavior. This is what we all do in relationships. So when we can shine a light on it and bring it up to the surface, then we can actually work on it and do something about it. So the best that you can as I'm going through these, even if just a little bit of you can relate, see if you can relate to these and see these behaviors in yourself so that you can empower yourself to do something different.
And Karen, if I and before you get into just to reinforce what you're saying,
Mm-hmm.
is often sometimes women feel like, well, how come it's all on me, and what about my husband?
Yeah.
And we just want to remind you that what we're talking about is if you're in relationship with a good man and you are um, a woman who wants to do well and treat her husband well and wants to have a foundation of two good people coming together, these are some of the things you can do that allow you to change and make changes in your marriage without having your husband have to do things which can empower you to make a difference in your marriage. So if you can identify behavioral patterns that you know that you're doing that are creating an unhealthy and codependent relationship, it's something that you can empower yourself to change within yourself and see if those changes will make a difference in how you experience your marriage, and then you'll feel better about yourself and know that you are in control of your marriage and not a victim to the experience that and that you feel that it's happening to you.
Yeah. Thank you, David. That was good clarification. So, jumping into the list, these are some ways that we can know if we have codependent behaviors, if these things are happening, you experience this in yourself, then this is something to look at. And so the first one is very in line with our three principles, but our first one is I need my husband to change so I can be happy. I mean, how familiar is that
Mm.
in all the things we say? If he just would take initiative to pick up around the house or take the trash out, or if he would just do this or stop doing this, then I could be happy.
Mm.
I think that is That's just what we do. It's
And and
very
and
familiar.
and I hope you can see that's codependent. If only my husband would do these things, then I would be happy. So my happiness is dependent upon the actions my husband does and doesn't do. That's the definition we're trying to help people, listeners, understand. That's codependent. And what we're seeking to do is build an independent sense of ourselves so that we don't need to be that. So keep going, Karen. Thank
All
you.
right, of course. The next one is I need my husband to listen to me so I can feel heard. Again, the dependence part is if my husband listens to me, I'll feel heard. If he doesn't listen to me, I'll feel unheard. And again, puts us completely dependent on our husband and what they're doing or not doing. And David, of course, jump in with any of these,
Yeah,
if
no, keep
anything you have
going.
to add. And the next one is I need my husband to be attuned to my emotional needs so I feel understood. The next one is I need my husband to speak in my love language so I feel loved. That's a common thing, I think, that gets brought up in traditional marriage counseling and couples therapy is learning each other's love languages, that I'll feel loved, I'll feel taken care of if my husband speaks in my love language. The next one is I need my husband to pick up around the house so I don't have to feel responsible for everything. The next one, I want my husband to be romantic and spontaneous so I feel special. So we are seeing the pattern in the
Yeah.
statements. The first part is this is what I need my husband to do so I feel or experience this.
Yeah. And again, this is what we're trying to reinforce is these are codependent behaviors that I can't feel this within myself independent of my husband either doing or not doing something.
Another one, I need my husband to be in a good mood so that I can be in a good mood. And I can't tell you how often that this comes up. It's still even in my marriage where if my husband isn't in a good mood, then I feel like I'm not in a good mood. So that's something I'm constantly catching myself in of no, I get to experience me just as me, regardless of if my husband is in a good mood or not.
Okay.
Um, I need my husband to allow me to vent without trying to solve my problems so I can feel validated. Another is I need my husband to pursue me so I feel desirable. I need my husband to stop playing video games and watching sports or TV so I don't feel lonely and like I have a roommate. And the last one we have on our list is I need my husband to eat healthy and exercise with me so I can lose weight. So again, all of these are the behaviors we're looking for our husbands to do or stop doing so that we can have a different experience. And that, again, what David was saying, reinforcing, that's really what codependent is allowing another person, allowing our husband to be responsible for how we're experiencing ourselves. And we're always at the whim of what they're doing or not doing without any source of independence in experience of me having a self and being able to know who I am.
So I thank you, Karen.
Mm-hmm.
I hope the listeners can see themselves in this list and recognize that if you see yourself, then that's a good thing, not
Mm-hmm.
something wrong. That then you can make some choices to do something different and be in control of changing yourself so you're not dependent upon your husband to change in order to change your experience. Again, that's the definition of codependency that we're trying to articulate that's pervasive in our relationships and our marriages that if my husband changes then I can feel this way rather than I if you're not codependent if I change and do things for myself I can change the experience of myself. I have a quote here that I thought I would read is when I change how I feel about myself, how I feel about my husband changes.
Mm.
So it's a very powerful thing to me. When I'm codependent, it's just the opposite. I need my husband to change in order for me to feel better about myself. And going into this again, we often talk about being a victim and blaming as a very big part of the challenges that we have in marriages. And when we're blaming our husband, I hope you can see that in blame, we're putting the responsibility of our unhappiness or how we're feeling in our marriage on our husband, which is codependent. I cannot be happy within myself because of the behavior of my husband. Karen, we worked with uh, a client
Hmm.
that we were helping them to her to see her codependent behavior in her marriage, and I thought it might be telling to share to our listeners so that they can see themselves in this client, which again is not to beat yourself up, but to normalize. Because I think what often happens in marriage is we think everybody else is happy. We see them in the restaurants and they're cuddling, or we see couples on TV cuddling and being holding hands, and we think, oh, everybody else is happy except for me. But what we're trying to do is to have you understand that what we're teaching at a New Life Center comes from 10 years of research and study, working with hundreds of women in relationships and post and pre relationships, so that we can see a common theme, a normalcy that happens in marriages with women, so they can see that there's nothing wrong with them and that you share commonality with other women, so you can make changes and do something that doesn't make you feel like there's something wrong with you. If there's something wrong with you, then you have a problem. But if everybody else has experienced the same thing, it's not you. You just have to change how you see things and understand it for changing your marriage. So, can you share the work that you did with this female client?
Sure. So, one of the things that we've talked about, and I wanted to also take a moment. We have quite a few viewers, so I wanted to say hi and
Yeah,
thank you for joining us. And one of the things we talk about again and again in our videos is the concept of common denominator.
thank you.
That a lot of times we look at and get confused thinking, oh, it's all the men I've been with that my relationships have failed. I always pick the wrong guy. And what we teach to shift perspective so that we can be in control of our experience and we can change is about common denominator, that you're the common denominator in all the relationships that you've had with men, that you're the only constant in all of those relationships, which is a good thing because then I can look at myself or you can look at yourself and see what's going on in you or what are some unresolved issues in yourself that you keep coming up against the same problems in your relationships with men and now in your marriage. And so that's what I helped my client with, is for her to list out all of her relationships with men. And I believe there were 8. And
Mm.
it started with her dad and then different relationships she had had throughout her life. And then, of course, her husband.
Romantic relationship. Yeah.
Yes, romantic relationships. And then she had a very close relationship with her dad and knew that a lot of her problems stemming from her romantic relationships with men also showed up in her relationship with her
Yeah.
dad.
Yeah.
And what she had to see and look at was how her codependency and depending on these men to treat her a certain way or take care of her a certain way would finally give her the relationship she wanted, and that never worked out that way.
Mhm.
So she had to see how she was the common denominator in all of those relationships and what was going on with her that caused her to have that same experience over and over and over again. So we looked at her beliefs, what her beliefs were about herself that kept her in this holding pattern of being codependent on men to give her the experience of herself. And the first belief she had was, I have to have a man to be happy, that her happiness was dependent on being with a man. And the second belief was, I cannot be happy by myself, that
Mhm.
there's no way to be happy just by myself. I need a man or need something or someone else to make me happy. And the third belief was, I am not happy with who I am. And these were the things that she kept running up against that were keeping her codependent now in her marriage. And her narrative about these beliefs and how she experienced herself,
Can I
or
interrupt for a second? What
of
do you mean
course.
by a narrative?
Oh, thank you for that.
Yeah,
This was kind of the tape playing
yeah,
in her head,
yeah,
that kind of negative self-talk
yeah. That
that she
support
couldn't
these
get out of.
beliefs. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and so when we have those tapes playing and we have that negative self-talk playing, that's the place we make choices from,
yeah.
that lead us to the same experience over and over and over again. And until we look at that tape that's playing and look at that, we can't get out of it.
Can you repeat that again, Karen? I think it might be really helpful for women to understand that they do have a narrative that's
Mm-hmm.
going on behind the scene, both sometimes conscious and unconscious, and that's what causes them to have the behavioral patterns. And one of the things that we do is we articulate the narrative so they can begin to see what, as you said, the choices they're making. I'm sorry to, can you say
It's,
that again?
yeah,
Because
of
it's
course. What
really
we
important.
don't realize is these narratives we have playing, and a lot of times they're negative because of our experiences we've had in our lives and the blame and the hurt that we're holding on to. That we have these tapes playing of who we believe we are, or why we think we're having the experience that we're having. And that's the place where we make our
Right,
choices from.
and that's right.
And our choice, the choices, I'm missing the word I'm looking for, but like reinstate or
Yeah, reinforce.
reinforce. Thank you. I'm
Yeah,
like, I know it's a rein. It reinforces that
that's right.
narrative. And
Yeah.
we just continue making choices that support that. So once we can see it, we can start to break out of it and start to make
Mhm.
new choices. So this client's narrative was about being codependent and needing a man to be happy. So I can hide and play safe in relationships with men because I can blame them for the experience of myself. I don't have to show up as myself. I can put the burden of my unhappiness on men. I do not know myself independent of how these men treat me. And this was the narrative playing where she kept making choices that kept giving her the same experience in all of those romantic relationships she had with men.
And the other thing that's fascinating, Karen, I can share with the listeners is that the beliefs that you listed and the narrative
Mhm.
are common in the majority of the women that we've worked with over the last 10 years. And it's fascinating to see the consistency of the narrative and the beliefs over the years. And and the good news is that it's if you're in good company and there's not anything wrong with you or you need to beat yourself up as it's you're really normal and it help and when you normalize it then you can change it. But if you dramatize it and think that you're the only one that feels this way and then it makes it overwhelming and you can't do anything about it.
Yeah, that's true. All right. Where do we go from here?
Well, I think the next step clearly is okay, how do you solve this codependency issue? So,
Yeah.
okay, we if you can the listeners can understand, oh my gosh, I see myself in these codependent behaviors. I do realize how I experience in myself and how I feel about myself is dependent upon what my husband does and doesn't do. That I do not have a sense of independence of my own self. I do not know myself well enough to have my own experience, which is independent of my husband. So what we teach and the strategies we use in our relationship system is how to build a relationship with yourself so that you are independent and you can meet your own needs without being dependent upon your husband. It doesn't mean that in a healthy relationship that you don't share and support each other in your needs, but the key is in codependency that you are incapable of having a healthy relationship independent of how your husband is acting or not acting. That's the foundation of codependency. So what we teach is how to build a relationship with yourself so that you're no longer codependent and you can have your own experience of own internal experience of being happy and content within yourself, and your husband then is then free to be himself, and rather wanting to change your husband and thinking he's the source of your unhappiness, you are in control of your own happiness, the experience of yourself, so that each of you can come together as independent people and experiencing yourself and sharing that together rather than needing each other to meet your needs so that you can feel satisfied in your marriage. So the most important piece, Karen, is building a relationship with yourself, which is kind of the foundation of everything we teach at a New Life Center. And what are the mechanics of building a relationship with yourself? And maybe you can share a little bit about the dating course that we teach, and why ideally it would be great if every woman before she got married took our dating course to understand how to build a relationship with themselves. Maybe that's a good place to start, Karen.
Yeah, and it- also the cool thing is yes, it takes hard work, but you can untangle yourself and you
Mm,
you can do this work in your marriage. That's what I'm doing and have been doing for 4 years. But one of the things I share with my female clients who are single in the dating world is they have a huge advantage that they can begin to get to know who they are and become independent and become strong in themselves before getting into a relationship,
mm,
so that once they find someone that they decide this is someone I want to see if we can go the marathon together and go for the long haul, that they can actually come into the relationship already with a strong sense of self and a strong sense of knowing who they are so that they don't lose themselves in the relationship. So one of the things that we teach, and David was talking about our dating course, is that for women who are single, we teach them how to date to find themselves,
mm,
to not date to get the relationship, but to actually date to shake up and stir up all of their unhealthy relationship patterns and behaviors and how they respond and how they lose themselves, and to
mhm,
explore all that in the process of dating, not being in it to find that long-term relationship immediately, but that is a process and comes over time. So in the beginning stages of dating, they're really using it as a tool to build a relationship with
mm,
themselves and get to know who they are. And then the cool piece about that is then they can actually make a conscious choice about getting into a relationship because they know who they are, and they can find someone that like this is someone I want to grow with and do the hard work with. For me, I lucked out. I have an amazing husband and a really, really good man. But when we first started dating, there was no conscious choice on my part that I was getting into a relationship and what that was going to entail. It
mhm,
was, we kind of just fall into a relationship. There's no choice being
mm.
made. So when we can do that work in dating to get to know ourselves, we actually get to make a choice and set ourselves up from the very beginning with a really healthy, solid foundation to not lose ourselves and to remain independent in a constructive, healthy way.
Thank you. So the in, so our relationship strategy teaches women how to disentangle themselves from their husband so they can find themselves again and create a sense of independence and a, an, their own inner happiness so they can be independent as their own source of happiness and providing their own emotional needs rather than dependent on their husband. It's difficult but doable once you have a strategy that outlines how to find yourself and build a relationship with yourself by doing the things that you know you love to do, and to support yourself in discovering yourself. and that's the key to breaking this codependent entanglement that we have in our cultural traditional marriage, because we've never really been taught that we have to be are happy have to be independent and have a sense of self and who we are before we get married, because afterwards we lose ourselves and we feel a sense of I don't know who I am anymore, in this codependency that our culture and society accepts as normal, and try to solve the marriage issues and problem from a place of codependency rather than teaching a sense of independence, of knowing ourselves and bringing that into the relationship. Can you kind of wrap things up for us, Karen? And what was our message today, and in an overview?
Yeah, so our message today is tying it back into the title, the one shift you really need to make in your marriage to live happily ever after and to have the relationship you always dreamed of, is that you have to untangle yourself and work on and look at to see how you're codependent on your husband for the experience you're having of yourself. And that when you're able to see those things, to see how you want him to change to make you happy, or looking at the things you want him to do or stop doing to make you happy or make you feel better in the relationship, or make you feel like you have more connection, that you have to untangle yourself from that to learn how to do those things for you, to build a relationship with yourself. That's the cure for codependence, is knowing who you are, being strong and solid in yourself, and having that relationship with yourself. And that's why we wanted to talk about this today, because this is, like David said in the beginning, this is so pervasive and we never stop to think of it, because we tie that word codependent into more of a psychological definition, or like a mental health diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
And what we're trying to help people see today, or help our viewers and listeners see, is that codependency is a really pervasive human experience. It's common, and we have a much broader definition, that it's just wanting somebody else to provide, or allowing another to be responsible for how you experience yourself. And we can see that everywhere, if we slow down and look at that.
And so what's the value of seeing that, Karen?
Yeah, the value of seeing it is then you can change it and you
Yeah.
can work on it. It's not to beat yourself up or make yourself wrong in any way. It's just kind of for me, it was like a wake up call
Yeah.
of seeing, oh my gosh, this is everywhere. I mean, from the moment I wake up in the morning, it's like, well, what's my husband doing? And then planning my day around that. Or what's he going to wear tonight? Maybe I should try to dress in a way that matches what or it shows up everywhere. So the reason we're bringing it up is that when you can see it, then you can actually change it
That's right.
and begin to see what you have control over to change in your marriage and in yourself, so that you can be empowered and live the life that you always imagined for yourself.
And thank you again. Sorry to be repetitive, viewers, but the codependency is the feeling that you are powerless and feel
Mm.
trapped in your marriage. That's the experience of codependency, that you don't know any way out.
Yeah.
But when you realize and break the entanglement, and realize that the experience of yourself is yours and a choice that you have and can control, then you're empowered and can disentangle and become untrapped and empowered in your marriage to make the changes, and not to be dependent upon your husband to be the one that needs to change for you to be happy.
Thank you, David. That was perfect.
So
So, or go ahead.
Let's wrap up and we're
All
ready to
right.
go.
So if you're listening and you're seeing, oh my gosh, this is a wake up call for me. This really resonates. I can see how I am very dependent on my husband or my marriage to make me happy, and it's not working out for you. And you want to explore how we can maybe help you to get to the root of that and to gain clarity so that you have an action plan to make steps forward. Then let's have a call, private message me, and we will set up a time to just have a conversation and get you crystal clear on what the real problems are in your marriage, not the stories that you tell yourself,
Mhm.
where you would like to be, what you would like to experience in your life and in your marriage, and what you can do to make that happen and the steps you need to make to change. So if you're ready to have that call, I would love to talk. Like I said, just private message me and we'll get something set up.
Thank you, Karen, and thank you to our listeners. Feel very fortunate to be able to share this and empower women in this context. Also, remember we have relationship courses for men too, but these are the things that women can choose to know that they're in control of so they can be empowered to make changes in their marriage so they can be happy and fulfilled in their life. So thank you, everybody. I hope you have a lovely day, and thank you, Karen, for sharing this and being a true teacher and doing your work yourself and sharing it from your heart. And thank you, everybody.
Thank
Have
you.
a nice day.
Bye. Thank you.